What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over a generic beginner's sort of tanking build. It's not specific to the Dragon Knight, slip of the tongue there. This is kind of focused in on just a generic tanking build that you can apply to really any class. So the kind of basis behind this build is to basically take all the base game things in the game right now and basically make a build that is sufficient for tanking pretty much starting off vet trials. Maybe not the vet DLCs, but should be sufficient to kind of get you started with tanking things like vet dungeons, or even the vet DLC dungeons, or even like the vet trials even. So that's kind of the basis behind that. Use crafted gear, overland gear, base game dungeon gear to basically create a tanking build that is sufficient for pretty much all the different classes. Now each of the classes might have a few sets that might be better suited for them, and when we get to those classes I'll go ahead and talk about those sets. But for the most part, this particular build is going to be pretty much applicable across all different classes. I am on my Templar. We're doing over a Templar tank right now. So I will talk a little bit about like skill substitutions you might want to make depending on what class you are, because obviously not all classes have access to the same sort of skills and buffs, but for the most part, if you're interested in skills and things like that, you will want to check out the actual tank builds that I have on my channel or somewhere else, for example on Alkosh's website or on Fear Turbo's website, if you're more interested in the skills portion. This video is going to be focused in more on the actual gear itself, and I will also be doing some CP, particularly CP 300, because that's generally the CP where you'll finally be able to really start getting into the vet content, because at that point you pretty much have will no longer get any additional resources out of it, and you will have a decent amount of CPs to play around with in terms of overall mitigation. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started here. So again, we're just looking at base game sets here, so that really limited us a fair amount, especially when it came to our monster helm. The only base game monster helm, complete monster helm set that's actually going to be useful is going to be Bloodspawn. That's mainly because of that additional ultimate generation that you get whenever you take damage, less so for the additional physical and spell resistance buff that you get from that same effect there. It's really the only sort of group-oriented monster helm set that you can make use of as a tank. Now obviously as a Templar tank, for example, you do have things like Extended Ritual or Ritual Retribution, so you might be able to make use of something like Bogdan, for instance, to give some little bit group support that way. But for the most part, pretty much the only real support-oriented monster helm set that's in the base game is going to be Bloodspawn. So just keep that in mind if you are going to go into vet trials, you want to do more endgame content. Obviously you're going to need to get certain DLCs, but you should take a look at getting the DLC dungeons as well, because a lot of the stronger monster helm sets for support roles in particular do come from the DLC dungeons. So I would recommend taking a look at getting some of the dungeon packs if you're serious about getting into vet trials, just because your other options as a base game player are very limited. It's pretty much going to be Pirate Skeleton if you want to be more selfish. That does come with the downside of applying Minor Defile on yourself. Or you can do the classic Wohler sort of Magicka regen, where you have two one-piece regen sets, so something like, what is it, Shadowrend, and I don't remember what the other one is, but basically you just have two different monster helm pieces, but they both have Magicka regen as the one piece, so you give yourself a little bit additional Magicka regen that way. So those are really the only options here for monster helm sets, so you're really limited on base game if you want to be a tank and you want to wear a monster helm set. Of course, you could also wear something like 2-piece endurance or 2-piece agility for the health or stamina respectively, but that's still not that great as an option there. For your first set, going to go with Evan. This is a base game dungeon set, but it is definitely a set that you want to have as a tank. So you will need to farm this from Crypt of Hearts, but I do recommend doing it because it'll basically set you up for better success later on down the line, not just in dungeons but also in vet trials, so that way at the very least you have a set that is going to be used in vet trials if you ever want to go that route. So Evan comes from, like I said, Crypt of Hearts. You will need the jewelry because we are going with the crafted set as our second piece here. There are, I believe, unique ebon rings. I'm not sure about the there might be a unique ebon necklace, so there might be unique ebon drops. I'm not sure if they're from Crypt of Hearts 1 or Crypt of Hearts 2, but there are going to be unique ebon drops. Now, one of the things I will make note of here is that I do have the gold version of the rings here. If you're lucky on the gold vendor, you might be able to get the golden ebon rings, but otherwise you're going to be limited to purple rings, and you will be limited to healthy because, again, we're assuming only base game things, so no jewelry crafting, no transmutation. So pretty much limited to only healthy. Now this isn't necessarily a bad thing. You do have a lot of additional health here, so you can see we're at 39.4k max health here. But that is something to keep in mind here, that you will not be able to get something like Triune or Harmony or Swift if you are base game. All of those sort of jewelry traits are going to be pretty useful to have on hand, so you might want to consider picking up Somerset for the jewelry crafting, the ability to jewelry craft and research jewelry crafting traits so you can transmute these. But that's kind of up to you. Healthy is still perfectly fine, especially as if you're just aiming for sort of vet dungeons and the beginning vet trials like the Craglorn trials. So don't feel like you have to get the Somerset expansion. But if you do want to get into things like Cloud Rest and the DLC vet trials, then I would recommend taking a look at getting Somerset. The second set's going to be Torx Pack. This is a base game set craftable, so it requires 3 traits to know this. So it decreases your weapon enchant cooldown by 30% and increases the potency of your weapon enchants by 30% as well. So pretty nice. The 2-piece isn't terribly strong. It's 129 spell damage, not very useful as a tank. It does give you a little bit of additional self-heals. Most self-heals in the game are scaled off of your max magicka and spell damage, so it does give you a little bit of a stronger self-heal that way. And obviously max health is always useful, and the spell resistance is always great as well. So a really nice kind of defense-oriented set, but it also has a little bit of group utility as well with the increase in the weapon enchant potency. So you can choose to use poisons like I have here and go decisive, or you can go infused and run the crusher enchant here. Now that being said, you'll notice that we are doing double sword and board here. So again, this is a kind of a beginner tank build. So we're assuming that you don't really have that much experience with tanking, at least not in ESO. And so I recommend going double sword and board. It's just a lot easier. It's a lot safer for you that way if you have 2 sword and boards, just because you do get some additional mitigation from the sword and board passives there. Once you get more advanced, you can swap over to like a staff backbar, lightning, ice staff, or even a bow backbar. But if you're just starting off learning how to tank things, don't know all the mechanics just yet, not very used to tanking things and how to kind of approach it, then I would recommend sticking with double sword and board just while you're learning. Once you kind of get comfortable with the fights themselves and get more comfortable with the mechanics behind tanking, then you can swap to like a staff or bow backbar. So if you do decide to go with the enchants, then you will obviously want to go infused, but if you go with the poisons, you're going to want to go with decisive. The one-handed traits aren't that great, so if you are going poisons, decisive is pretty much like making the best out of the worst case scenario. But otherwise you should be running infused swords here. The crusher enchant, because it is one-handed, will be boosted by 30%, another 50% I should say. So you'll be sitting at roughly, I believe it would be about 1470 physical and spell resistance debuff, which isn't that great considering that the 2-handed enchant would be 2740, but it's better than nothing, especially in dungeons where, I should say dungeons where you're not really an optimized group, so penetration is going to be very low to begin with. So just something to keep in mind if you are trying to optimize for penetration. The 2-handed crusher is obviously going to be twice as strong, so just keep that in mind. If you're in a group, if you run with a consistent group, that they might need to put a little bit more points into their penetration CPs to kind of make up for the loss of the crusher enchant there. In terms of traits, enchants, things like that, still infused prismatics, sturdy and small with health. It's kind of up to you if you want to go all sturdy or not. I like to kind of say it really depends on what traits are dropped for which piece. So for example, if you happen to get a sturdy ebon chest, then you can stick with the sturdy ebon chest. I still would recommend sticking with the prismatic enchants on your large pieces at least, and that does include the shields. So you will be down 5 prismatic enchants, so that will cost you quite a bit of money, but I think it'll be worth it because you do get some additional resources out of it, magicka and stamina, while giving up a little bit of health, which I think is a fair trade-off. It is going to cost you probably around 50k at this point on PCNA. Depends on obviously your specific server and how the economy is doing on that specific server, but I know in PCNA it'll probably set you back about 50k or so to get those prismatics going on your large pieces there. Then for your jewelry, again, healthy, and then you have shield play enchants across all 3. You can also replace them with magicka regen list, but generally speaking I would recommend sticking with shield play enchants for beginner tanks. generally because you guys, from what I've seen at least, are generally speaking going to be more perma blocking. So it'll help out your sustain a little bit, and then once you get more comfortable, you can start playing around with maybe the Magicka regen glyph. Once you know when you can drop block and things like that. Sturdy on our shields, prismatic. Then I already talked about weapons. You can go infused if you're not using poisons. If you're using poisons, then go decisive. So that's pretty much it for gear, and again, this will carry over to all the different classes in the game. This is good for all classes. So just kind of figure out what you want to do, whether you want to run poisons or you want to run just a plain enchant. So Crusher is going to be the best. You can also run Weakening if you'd like. You can run 2 different enchants if you would prefer. But if you're just starting off, I'd probably recommend running the same enchant on your bars, just so that way you get 100% uptime on those enchants there. Character sheet, Imperials. So actually, I made a mistake here. I'm assuming that you have base game stuff, so you don't have access to the Imperial class. So you should be in Nord instead. So Nord is going to be your best base game race there. If you do have access to the Imperial Edition and you can be an Imperial, then by all means you can be an Imperial as well. I touched upon this on all of my tank videos, but race doesn't really matter too much as a tank. If you do want to min-max, Nords are widely regarded to be kind of the best race for tanking right now, with resistance plus the health stamina plus the ultimate that you get back when you take damage. All those are very, very strong for tanking. So the meta race, if you want to say there's a meta race for tanking, is going to be the Nords, followed by the Argonians and Imperials kind of as a second, and then everything else just kind of falls afterwards. Orcs are also a very good option if you want to play stamina DPS on the side, and if you do intend on going very deep into endgame stuff, you know, the Vet DLC trials, Vet hard modes, then Orc is probably going to be your best bet, because you do a little bit of additional damage as an Orc, which helps out. Every little bit of DPS does help out when you get to that level of play there, but if you don't intend on getting to that level of play, then again, race doesn't really matter. If you want to min-max, Argonians, Imperials, and Nords are your best 3 options. Attributes are going to depend on your race. So right here on an Imperial Templar, I have 20 health, 20 stamina, 24 magicka, but it's really going to vary depending on race. Again, the general rule of thumb, and I've kind of touched upon this on all my tank build videos, 35k into health, and then put the rest into magicka and stamina, and we want to make sure your stamina is higher than your max magicka here. So I'm well above that 35k threshold there, and my max stamina is higher than my max magicka, so this is a pretty good substitution here. If I really wanted to, I could even shift a few points out of health, put them into stamina and magicka here. Keep in mind that with Torx Pack you do have 1 armor bonus that is max health, so you can put a few more less points into health if you would prefer, but if you decide to swap over to more meta tank sets like Alkosh and things like that, plus you have the healthy jewelry, so if you manage to transmute those into Triune, you will lose some health that way. So just keep in mind where all your health is coming from before you decide to kind of play around with your attribute points. Again, that health threshold is going to be 35k. And then finally, our Mundus Stone Atronach for the Magicka regen, because again, a lot of our moves do use Magicka, so we want to have good Magicka regen going. We are using purple food, so this is Tri-Stat food. It's actually pretty cheap to buy on your own. The recipes, depending on which one you get, can be fairly expensive if you want to make it yourself, but you can typically buy these. They're not that expensive, so definitely the best way to go here. And then we have Vampirism. You don't have to be a vampire if you don't want to. You do get 10% additional magic and stamina regen, and if you get to stage 3, like I am here, you do get access to the Undeath passive, which reduces damage further when you're below a certain health threshold, which is always nice. You will end up taking more damage from fire, which isn't that big of a deal considering you're a tank, so your resistances are naturally going to be quite a bit higher, and your health regen slower, so you get 50% reduction to health regen at stage 3. Stage 4, I believe, is 75% reduction in health regen. That's another thing you want to keep in mind there as well. But Vampirism is pretty strong on most vet content. There's not that much fire damage that you have to worry about. Pretty much Sunspire and Asylum are the only trials where you have a lot of fire damage, where you might want to drop Vampirism down or get rid of it entirely. But beyond that, tanks as vampires, because you have such high resistance and high mitigation, the extra fire damage actually doesn't hurt you all that badly. Now for skills, again, you're going to have to refer to each of the different build videos to kind of get an idea of what skills you want to run on your tank. I'll just kind of go over the general basics though. So the skills you definitely want to have on hand are going to be Pierce Armor and Heroic Slash for your sword and board line. and then Inner Rage from the Undaunted skill line, and then you definitely want to try to get balance. Not all classes are going to need this, so for example a Templar tank might not need balance because you already get Major Ward, Major Resolve from restoring focus, and if you're running like a Magicka Regen heavy build you might not need the balance. But it is nice to have here because you are trading health for Magicka, and that is always a good trade-off. You can just tell your healer, you know, hey, I'm using balance or whatever, if they're not used to you using balance yet, and that'll get you some additional health going in exchange for Magicka. So this does reduce the healing done, not the healing received, so you still get full heals from your healer, so it's actually a pretty nice trade-off there that way. But beyond that, the general rule of thumb is to basically find skills. You need at least one self-heal. So for example, Breath of Life would be a self-heal. On a Templar tank, Extended Ritual would also be considered a self-heal. Not a very strong self-heal, but a self-heal nonetheless. And then depending on whether you have a class shield, you want a shield. So for example on a Templar it'd be Radiant Ward, for a Dragonite it'd be Igneous Shield or Fragmented Shield. And then you kind of want to take a look at anything that can provide any sort of group utility. So for example Engulfing Flames on a DK, Power of the Light as a Templar tank here. And then definitely want to make sure to pick up a Silver Leash if you are a non-DK or Warden, because you do need a chain ability. You need to be able to pull things in for trash pulls. So Silver Leash is going to be the class agnostic option. Again, DKs, Wardens, and Necromancers do have class specific options for training things in. Then you want to have some sort of hard CC if you have one. So Templars don't have a hard CC, so the only hard CC that you can get that's class agnostic would be on the Psijic Order line, which you might not have because again we're assuming base game things. So for example DK would have Dark Talons, you would have Massive Hysteria as a Nightblade tank. Wardens, you would have Gripping Shards. So definitely want to have a hard CC in their toolkit somewhere as well. You might not necessarily need to use your pull and your hard CC, depending on if it's a trash pull or a tank or a big boss pull. But it is something you want to have ready. And then you do want to have Aggressive Warhorn as one of your ultimates. Does not have to be both bars, but at very least one bar should be Aggressive Warhorn. Regardless of whether that's 4-man content or Trials content, Warhorn is going to be really helpful for your overall group support there. Then finally our CP. So again, we're assuming we are going to be CP 300, so just allow me to clear my CPs real fast. Generally speaking, here you're going to want to invest a little bit into Arcanist, but your main focus is going to be in Shadow Ward. So you're going to want to jump Shadow Ward up to the very least 61, and that'll give you about 39 remaining points, so you can push Arcanist up to 39 then. You're not going to be able to hit all the jump points as you're leveling just because you don't have really enough CPs to necessarily hit all the different jump points in the game right now. So just do your best. So for a tank at the very least, your key things to look for in green CPs are going to be Shadow Ward and Arcanist when you're leveling. And once you get Shadow Ward up to like 66 or so, you get Arcanist up to like 64, then you can start putting them into other nodes. For blue CPs, this is assuming you're running just straight up tank build. Basically just do 50-50 Blessed and Elfborn. Those are the only two ones that really matter. Blessed for the additional healing done for your self heals, and then Elfborn because pretty much all heals in the game, not all of them, but a lot of them, scale off of your Magicka. They're considered Magicka abilities, so these are the two main nodes you want to focus in on as a tank while you're leveling. Then your red CPs, the balanced approach is going to be 27 into Hardy, 27 into Elemental Defender, and then 23 into Thick-Skinned, and 23 into Ironclad. That would be the balanced approach there, which I recommend picking up as you level, just to kind of take a kind of balanced approach until you know kind of where you're sitting at right there. And that's pretty much it for this video. Again, if you are interested in specific skill bar setups, I do recommend taking a look at all the build videos I have with the different tanking classes, just because covering all the different options for tanks is going to be a little bit tricky here. There is one set I do want to mention here for Nightblade tank. Actually, no, not for Nightblade tanks. I lied. I'm thinking back a little bit, but there is actually one crafted set I do want to bring up here for those of you guys who want to play more selfish and less group oriented. So it's gonna be, let me find it here, Hist Bark, So his spark, while you're blocking, gain major evasion, reducing damage from area of effect attacks by 25%, which is actually pretty nice overall. This is a craft set base game 4-piece, so it's not terrible. It's a little bit more selfish. A lot of moves are actually considered area of effect attacks, so you do get some additional mitigation this way. If you don't have a source of major evasion already, so for example, Nightblade tanks, this set's pretty much going to be useless for you because you already have major evasion from Blur. I believe that's what it's called, Blur or Mirage, maybe. So just another set you want to keep in mind if you want to play a little bit more selfish. There are quite a few sets here that are more selfish oriented, but generally speaking, as a tank in ESO, you want to be more group oriented, which is why we're going with Torx Pack instead. So I hope you guys found this video informative. If you guys have any questions about tanking or kind of beginning to tank on ESO, please feel free to leave comments down. Please feel free to leave comments down below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Again, I hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.